So, did some Christians continue to perform animal sacrifices after Jesus's crucifixion? That's what we're going to talk about coming up next. So, welcome back to the Michael Lofton Show on Reason and Theology. I want to go over a very quick, short PowerPoint presentation that I prepared today on the topic of animal sacrifices in Christianity after the crucifixion. This is going to be a very interesting topic, one that isn't usually explored, hence the reason why we are going to explore it together. But before we do that, I want to remind you, hit that subscribe button and the like button if you appreciate this kind of information and you enjoy the content. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to just go ahead and dive in here. You should be able to see the PowerPoint presentation right around now. So let's go ahead and begin. Animal sacrifices in Christianity after the crucifixion. Now, a quick, brief note. So this exploration is primarily for an educational awareness of the facts. That's the main goal here. How the facts are interpreted, internalized, how a person internalizes these things, how they're explained, and even potentially harmonized with Orthodox theology. That's an apologetic endeavor and a topic for another day. Apologetics, explaining things, harmonizing them, interpreting them, that's a topic for a different day. Today, what I want to do is simply educate and inform what some of the data shows, and at a later time, we can talk about apologetics. More importantly, moreover, this is not an exhaustive treatment on the topic, either biblically or historically. We are going to take a look at both, but certainly nothing exhaustive in nature, barely introductory. But it's enough to kind of prime the pump and begin the discussion, and maybe even make you aware of some interesting things that you were perhaps not aware of before. Now, before we begin, let's take a look really quickly here at the book of Hebrews in the New Testament, chapter 10, verses 8 through 10. After talking about the sacrifices in the Old Testament at length and giving a theological explanation of them in relationship to the new covenant and the sacrifice of Jesus, it says, when he said above, you have neither desired nor taken pleasure in sacrifices and offerings and burnt offerings and sin offerings, these are offered according to the law. Then he added, behold, I have come to do your will. Referring to Jesus here, quoting from the Old Testament. He does away with the first in order to establish the second, and by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Now notice that part, once for all. So what the writer of Hebrews is saying is that the death of Jesus is sacrificial in nature and satisfies atonement and redemption, and fulfills the Old Testament sacrificial ritual system. In other words, there's no longer any need for the blood of bulls and goats, because the author of Hebrews argues that, the blood of bulls and goats couldn't take away sin. That's why they had to continue to do it. But Jesus sacrificed himself once and for all, therefore taking away the need for animal sacrifices and settling that debt and penalty for sin once and for all. That's the book of Hebrews, and that's kind of what is being communicated here, especially towards the very end of verse 10, in the context of chapter 10. Okay, so with that in mind, you might think that, okay, well, hey, the author of Hebrews says the whole thing is fulfilled in Jesus. So you would probably expect for there to be no more sacrifices of animals after the crucifixion in Christian communities. I think a lot of people expect that, but that's simply not the case, historically speaking. So, for example, it appears that Paul approved of animal sacrifices after Jesus. Take a look at Acts 21 with me. This is verses 17 through 26. When he had come to Jerusalem, that's Paul, the brothers received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. And when they heard it, they glorified God, and they said to him, "You see, brother, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who have believed. They are also zealous for the law, and they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses." So they're coming to Paul saying, look, some people are saying that you're telling the Gentiles to forsake the laws of Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. What then is to be done? They will certainly hear that you have come. So in order to dispel this notion that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses, so telling Jews they don't have to keep the law of Moses anymore, how do we correct that misunderstanding of you, Paul? Well, do therefore what we tell you. We have 4 men who are under a vow. This is a Nazarite vow, as we'll see here in a moment. Take these men and purify yourself along with them, and pay their expenses, so that they may shave their heads. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have been told about you. In other words, people are saying that you're telling Jews that they don't have to follow Moses anymore, and the law, and the sacrifices, and all the temple system. They're saying you don't have to follow that anymore. But we know, Paul, that you're not really saying that. So go ahead and prove it to them by participating in the Mosaic law and in this system. So that you yourself also live in observance of the law. So go ahead and show everybody you observe the Mosaic law. But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we have sent a letter with our judgment that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, and from blood, and from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. So in other words, he's saying Jews are still to follow the Mosaic law, but Gentiles are not to do that. They just need to make sure not to sacrifice to idols, from blood, and what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. That's from the book of Acts, right? Earlier in the book of Acts, chapter 15. So it then says, then Paul took the men, and the next day he purified himself along with them, and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled, and the offering, the sacrifice, presented for each of them. Now that's weird. It's talking about Paul paying for and endorsing these people who are under this vow, offering a temple animal sacrifice. And this is obviously after Jesus, right? Saul becomes Paul after Jesus. So this is obviously after the crucifixion. There's a weird, curious notion of following the Mosaic law if you're a Jew. And that included here participating in the temple sacrifices and offering animal sacrifices. A commentary on this, and this is the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, says this. Now, if you're not familiar, the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible is a conservative, traditional commentary. It's not liberal theologically. It's very traditional, very conservative, right? So it says for this particular verse, in reference to this vow, it's a temporary Nazirite vow. We'll see what that is here in a moment. Of abstinence from wine, cutting the hair, and physical contact with corpses. There's a prohibition of coming into contact with corpses. It's in reference to Numbers 6, 1 through 12 that describes it. Now, the completion of the vow involved a week of purification, a ritual shaving of the head. That's what James was mentioning there in Acts. And a sacrificial offering of animals and food in the temple. Numbers 6, 13 through 21. Paul had completed a similar vow in 1818. So here you have a theologically conservative and traditional Catholic commentary very clearly saying that Paul was endorsing and participating in animal sacrifices in the temple after Jesus' crucifixion. Okay, so this isn't any kind of like liberal material that comes with wild stuff. No, this is well known and for anyone who has studied the area, hardly controversial. Well, there's a lot of different ways in which it's interpreted, internalized, understood, harmonized with Orthodox theology, harmonized with the book of Hebrews, harmonized with, X, Y, and Z. There's a lot of different ways. There's different explanations. There are all sorts of theories. Like I said, we can explore that in a more apologetic setting. But in this one, we're just simply exploring for educational purposes the phenomenon itself. Okay. So the Nazirite vow, according to the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, included a sacrificing of animals. Where do they get that from? They get that from Numbers 16, 13 through 21, which says this, something really fascinating. Now, this is the law of the Nazirite. When the period of their dedication is over, they are to be brought to the entrance to the tent of meeting. There they are to present their offerings, their sacrifices to the Lord. A year-old male lamb, so this was an animal sacrifice of a lamb, without defect for a burnt offering. There's different kinds of offerings. A year-old lamb without defect for a sin offering. Okay, so we got one for a burnt offering, one for a sin offering, a ram without defect for a fellowship offering, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, and a basket of bread made with the finest flour and without yeast, thick loaves with olive oil mixed in, and thin loaves brushed with olive oil. A lot of stuff going on here, but what it's saying is when you take this Nazirite vow to complete it at the end of this purification period, you go to the temple, you sacrifice one lamb as a burnt offering, another lamb as a sin offering, a ram as a fellowship offering. You bring and offer grain offerings, drink offerings, libations, stuff like that. So there's a number of things going on. But notice one of them is a lamb for a sin offering. Now that's pretty curious, because what this is saying is that Paul was participating in and also paying for an animal sacrifice as a sin offering. Because again, there's different kinds, and some might say, well, it was a Thanksgiving offering, or well, it was an X, Y, and Z. Well, here it specifies one of them is a sin offering. Now, this is after Jesus and after the crucifixion. So that would be something unexpected. Yet, it happened. As I pointed out with the Ignatius Study Bible, it readily recognizes this is a Nazirite vow. It points us to Numbers 6, 13 through 17 to describe what these sacrifices included, and here they are. Now, not only did Paul pay for these animal sacrifices, including a sin offering after Jesus' crucifixion, he himself participated in it, as the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible said. Acts 18:18 says this: after this, Paul stayed many days longer and then took leave of the brothers and set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila. He had cut his hair, for he was under a vow. And this was the Nazirite vow, as again the commentary notes. And that included Paul offering a lamb in the temple as a sacrifice, as a sin offering, among other kinds of offerings. How, again, that's compatible with Hebrews and other things, fascinating topic, 1,000 different answers, various solutions have been offered by all sorts of people. But at the very least, you have to say this is certainly unexpected, I would think, for most people, right? They would probably not think that this happened. And it was in the context of people saying, Paul, people are saying that you are telling Jews they don't have to follow the law of Moses and they don't have to follow the sacrifices of the temple. Prove to them that's not true, Paul, by doing this. And Paul does it. Paul doesn't come back and say, no, guys. I am telling people they don't have to follow the Mosaic law X, Y, and Z and blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't say that. Not only does he do that for others, he does it himself in Acts 18:18. Now, was it just Paul? Well, watch this. In Acts chapter 3, verse 1, it says, one day Peter and John were going up to the temple at the time of prayer at 3 in the afternoon. Some translations will put it the 9th hour. It's the same thing. 9th hour is 3 in the afternoon, 3 p.m. Now notice that they're going to the temple because this is still the period where this is obviously after Jesus, after the crucifixion, but before the apostles have been kicked out of the temple. You remember in the book of Acts, one chapter later, it describes how they were kicked out of the temple. They're not allowed to come there anymore. But up until they were kicked out, they were still going to the temple and participating in the temple system. Now, did they come to just pray? You know, like they went and prayed the Our Father or something like that? Or they prayed some Psalms? Is that what this is referring to? Well, notice it's at 3 in the afternoon. What was happening at 3 in the afternoon? Josephus tells us, and also the Old Testament tells us, but Josephus was telling us this was still going on at this time. Josephus in his Antiquities in book 14 says this, chapter 4. And anyone may hence learn how very great piety we exercise towards God and the observances of his laws, since the priests were not at all hindered from their sacred ministrations by their fear during this siege, but did still twice a day in the morning and about the 9th hour, 3 p.m., offer their sacrifices on the altar. And he's noting this up until the period of the destruction in the temple, which is obviously after Acts 3. So Josephus is testifying, you know, up until the destruction of the temple, they were still offering sacrifices of animals twice a day, and one of them is at the 9th hour. Why? Because at the 9th hour, you're supposed to do this according to the Old Testament. So when the apostles came, when Peter and John came to participate in the temple at the 9th hour, 3 in the afternoon, at the time of prayer, the sacrifices were going on. Now, does it explicitly say that they, participated, they brought a lamb with them? No, it doesn't explicitly say that. But it is interesting that it's taking place at that time and they're participating in the temple system at this time. And we're seeing elsewhere Paul participating in the animal sacrifices, one of which included a sin offering. Because again, there's different kinds. Some might say, well, this is a sacrifice for Thanksgiving. There are those. But there are also sacrifices for sins. And as we saw, Numbers describes one of them for the Nazarite vow that Paul himself completed well after Jesus' crucifixion. Now, Pope Gregory has some interesting things to say about animal sacrifices in his day. Obviously, Pope Gregory's much later than the Apostle Paul, right? Pope Gregory the Great. He's in 600s, 500s, 600s. Let's get the exact date on him. Hold on. Pope Gregory the Great. Died 604. So yeah, 500s through 600s. Okay, so obviously much, much later than the Book of Acts. But he says something interesting to an abbot, and his instructions were then supposed to be relayed to Augustine of Canterbury. And I've spoken about this before, whenever I spoke about how Catholicism has often had the policy of taking elements of paganism and adapting them into Christianity, maybe eliminating any elements that are absolutely incompatible with Christianity. And then in other cases, just, preserving whatever is left over, but kind of baptizing them and adapting them. This is something that's very well known, hardly controversial. I've spoken about it many times. I've done a lot of videos on it, including one just a few days ago, where we went over some very clear examples of that, where you have many early Christians participating in offering food and drink to the dead, like pouring it in their dead body, pouring it in their skull, because they believed that this was something that would nourish the deceased. And they got that from paganism, as I showed in that episode. Hardly controversial, but building on that, where he talks about this policy of, look, take whatever we can from paganism, keep it in Christianity. I mean, you got to get rid of some things, like you can't keep idols, but whatever these people were doing to the idols, just have them do it to the martyrs. This is a policy that we've seen Augustine and Jerome and others talk about. Gregory the Great's talking about it here. Do that with these pagan temples. Don't destroy the pagan temples. Keep the pagan temples. Just get rid of the idols and use that pagan temple now as a Christian temple. All right, so in that context, watch what he says about the animal sacrifices, because, of course, the pagans are still participating in animal sacrifices. Further, since it has been their custom to slaughter oxen in sacrifice, they should receive some solemnity in exchange. Let them, therefore, on the day of the dedication of their churches, or on the feast of the martyrs whose relics are preserved in them, build themselves huts around their one-time temples, and celebrate the occasion with religious feasting. So he's saying, normally whenever they would sacrifice their animals to their gods, let them come together on the days of the martyrs and let them engage in religious feasting. Now, what did this include? He says they will sacrifice and eat the animals. So he's talking about them engaging in animal sacrifice on the feast day of a martyr, not anymore as an offering to the devil, but for the glory of God, to whom, as the giver of all things, they will give thanks for having been satiated. So don't offer these animal sacrifices to idols and to Satan. Instead, offer them to God. Thus, if they are not deprived of all exterior joys, they will more easily taste the interior ones. For surely it is impossible to efface all at once everything from the strong minds, just as when one wishes to reach the top of a mountain, he must climb by stages and step by step, not by leaps and bounds. That's exactly what Augustine and Jerome, I had mentioned in a previous episode, were saying. They were saying, look, you got all these pagans coming into the church now. The empire has become Christian. So you got a lot of these pagans now becoming Christian. And they're bringing with them a lot of their paganism, a lot of their pagan beliefs, a lot of their pagan feasts. Well, let's, instead of expecting too much at once from them, let's just take some of their pagan feasts, and instead of offering it to idols, let's have them offer it to the martyrs. And they'll do the same stuff. They'll just do it to the martyrs instead of the idols. We saw Augustine saying that, Jerome saying that, Gregory the Great is saying that. He's officially endorsing this, as is the Pope, the Bishop of Rome. He's saying, look, you can't expect too much from them. You can't just tell them to stop offering animal sacrifices and feast days. So let them just do it to the martyrs. You don't want to just tell them, well, you got to just stop everything, because then they're not going to want to become Christian. They're going to say, this is too demanding. This is too hard on us. But notice animal sacrifices is here. Now, he doesn't go into any more details. He doesn't talk about, the particular kinds of animal sacrifices. Are these Thanksgiving sacrifices? Are they sin offerings? Like, he doesn't go into any detail about that. He just talks about animal sacrifices in relation to feasting on the days of martyrs, saints, dedication of the church. But here we see, in a Christian context, ongoing practices of animal sacrifices, in this particular case being incorporated from paganism, enduring way after the time of Jesus. Continuing with that, however, they didn't just stop there. There's actually a curious practice of Kourbania in Greek Orthodoxy, a part of Eastern Orthodoxy. Some Greek Orthodox participate in animal sacrifices to this day. And they may or may not have different perspectives on it. And not all Eastern Orthodox will do this. Not even all Greek Orthodox will do this. And for some, it is controversial. And for some, they condemn it. Others say, hey, there's nothing wrong with it, and their priests will participate in it. So in parts of Greece, an ancient practice, it is an old practice of offering an animal sacrifice, usually a lamb, although it could be other things as well, as an offering to the saints, still exists today. So it's in relation to the saints. Sounds very similar to what Gregory the Great was talking about, right? The slaughter usually takes place as part of the divine liturgy, so part of the Mass, or after the Mass, after the divine liturgy of Chrysostom. Now, a 16th century Turkish slave gives the following description of this, which still lasts unto this day. This is an ancient practice in Greece, among Christians in Greece, that endures to this very day. But here's one describing it in the 16th century. In the time of any disease or peril, they promise in certain places to sacrifice either a sheep or an ox after the vowed offering is not burned, like unto a beast killed and laid on the altar, as the custom was among the Jews. But after that the beast is slain, the skin, head, and feet, and fourth part of the flesh are, I don't know what that is because it's his archaic English, gene unto the priest, I guess given unto the priest, and other part to the poor people, and the third unto the neighbors. The killers of the sacrifice do make ready the other fragments for the sleeves and their companions to feed on. Neither are they bound to perform the vow. Notice this is sometimes in relation to a vow. You do have this practice among some Christian communities where there will be a vow and an animal sacrifice association with it. Where did they get that from? That comes from the Old Testament in part. Also, it could come from paganism because the pagans had a custom like that as well. For all things with them are done conditionally, I will give if thou wilt grant. So in other words, some of these Greek Orthodox were saying, God, if you do this for me, I'll offer this animal sacrifice to you. You remember actually Jethro? It was Jethro, right? Am I getting it wrong? You remember the guy in the Old Testament, in the book of Judges, who goes and says to God, hey, if you give me victory in this battle, the first thing that comes out of my mouth, my house, when I go home, I'll offer as a sacrifice to you. And God gives him a victory. The first thing that came out was his daughter. And so he offered his daughter as a human sacrifice to God. And the Bible doesn't condemn it. The New Testament praises him for it. Interestingly enough, it praises him for keeping his vow. Be that as it may, here you notice kind of in the Old Testament, God, if you do this, I'll sacrifice this for you. So that idea is kind of going on here. God, if you give me favor in this or do that for me, I'll sacrifice this animal for you. The like worshiping of God is observed among the Grecians. Armenians, we're going to talk about them in a second, in other realms in Asia imitating the Christian religion. So he's saying that this is, something that is done among not just the Greeks, but others such as the Armenians. Well, let's take a quick look at that. You have what's called in Armenian Orthodoxy, the Matagh. So some Armenians continue an ancient practice of animal slaughter, and it's done for various purposes. Yeah, thank you so much, Great Wall. Jephthah. Yeah, not Jethro, Jephthah. Appreciate you. So it's for various purposes, just according to who you ask, right? Some will say it's for forgiveness, like for God to forgive them of something. Others will say, no, it's for Thanksgiving. Others will say it's in relation to a vow. There's different perspectives, different views. Some will condemn it, some will approve of it. But it's for various purposes, including Thanksgiving to God. So that is a common one. Here you can see an Armenian boy sacrificing an animal at the foot of a monastery. So it's usually done at the foot of a monastery or a church. And that's what's taking place here. He's slaughtering, I think it's a rabbit or something, there at the foot of whatever monastery he's at there in Armenia. As I understand it, this also happens among the Ethiopian Orthodox as well. Okay, so this is a practice that is still going on to this very day in some Christian communities. Not everyone, right? But some, and for different purposes. And there's different views on it, and there's different ways of explaining it. But it is a phenomenon that is still going on, and many people may not actually be aware of that. Okay, so that's what I wanted to present to you. Like I said, it was a pretty short presentation, certainly not exhaustive in nature, but I wanted to introduce the topic to you and make you aware of some things you probably haven't seen before. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. You're welcome to tell me, of course, in the comment section. I do want to make y'all aware of something right here. If you go to rtcourses.com, R as in reason, T as in theology, courses.com. I just added the introduction to the magisterium course on here. This is the class that I teach at a Catholic university, Catholic Polytechnic University. It is a university level course on the magisterium, introduction to the magisterium. It's the same exact course. I'm now making it available to you all. We're going over 10 different lectures on the Old Testament and its roots of the magisterium, the New Testament foundation of the magisterium, who teaches, what can be taught, how it is taught, infallibly, non-infallibly, the question of do I have to accept the teaching or can I dissent? Non-infallible teachings versus infallible teachings, disciplines, different levels of teachings, as well as how to read magisterial documents, and also the question of reversals. Can the church reverse one of its teachings and disciplines and things like that? And so you will want to go ahead and check that out at rtcourses.com. Simply click on Introduction to the Magisterium. Again, this is the very course I teach at the university level. So it's giving you a true university level education without the university level cost and commitment. So definitely go and check it out. I am going to be adding some other courses that I teach at the university level on the magisterium as well, but the introduction to the magisterium course already available, rtcourses.com. Certainly go and check it out. And I would greatly appreciate it if you guys hit that subscribe button and the like button on this video if you haven't already. Also consider supporting the channel so I can continue to offer these kinds of resources to everyone on a daily basis for free. A great way to support the channel is Patreon, patreon.com/reason and theology, or hit the join button right here on YouTube next to the subscribe button, and I would greatly appreciate your support. Okay, I'll see y'all tomorrow. God bless.